Good evening and welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum at the Institute of Politics. My name is Aydin Sahba. I'm a sophomore studying government and philosophy at the college, and I'm a member of the JFK Jr. Forum Committee. Before we begin, please note the exit doors, which are located on both the park side and JFK Street side of the forum. In the event of an emergency, walk to the exit closest to you and congregate in the JFK Park. Please also take a moment now to silence your cell phones. And join me in welcoming Harvard College undergraduate Laura Cremer.
Good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you here to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum here at the Institute of Politics. My name is Laura Perez Cremer. I'm a freshman at the college studying government, and I'm also a member of the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum Committee. Tonight, we have the distinct privilege of welcoming a truly exceptional public servant and global leader, Sir Richard Moore. Sir Richard served as a chief of Britain's Secret Intelligence Service, MI6, from 2020 to 2025, guiding the organization through one of the most turbulent periods in recent history, marked by war in Europe and the Middle East, intensifying great power competition, rapid technological disruption, and the rise of artificial intelligence. Over nearly 4 decades in intelligence and diplomacy, he has played a central role in shaping British foreign and security policy, strengthening alliance, and adapting intelligence work to the demands of the 21st century. Today, Sir Moore draws on years of unique experience to offer sharp insights into public service, emerging global challenges, and decision-making on the changing geopolitical landscape. I should add that this place may feel familiar to him, as Sir Richard Moore himself was a Kennedy Scholar and studied right here at the Harvard Kennedy School. This conversation will be moderated by Graham Allison, the Douglas Dillon Professor of Government at Harvard University, where he has taught for 5 decades. Allison is a leading analyst of national security with long-standing expertise in nuclear weapons, Russia, China, and decision-making. We would like to thank the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs for co-sponsoring tonight's session, and a special thanks to Dr. Michael Miner for his work in bringing this event together. Now, please join me in welcoming Sir Richard Moore and Graham Allison to the stage.
So good evening, and it's a great honor to welcome Sir Richard to the forum. This time last year, he was C. That's the nickname for the chief executive of MI6, the principal spy agency for Great Britain. He is, as was mentioned, one of our alumni. He was a Kennedy Scholar here in 1985, 86.
Mm-hmm. In your early years.
In my early years, yes. He's now the head of the Kennedy Trust, which sends Kennedy Fellows to Harvard and MIT every year, of whom he was one in a previous generation. But he's a person who everyone in the intelligence community who's had a chance to know and work with looks up to as somebody who led MI6 through a difficult period as the world was changing over the last 5 years, and who actually worked for MI6 and also for the Foreign Office for the previous, I think, 38 years. So a career. So we have a fantastic opportunity to hear from somebody about intelligence and its activity, and then the world, since among the other topics, when he was working for the Foreign Office, he was ambassador to Turkey, and he's also been involved with Iran for many years. So we're going to propose to, in this conversation, we have 3 topics. First, something about career and whether that's relevant for students today. Secondly, MI6 as an intelligence organization and what it is and what it does, for those of you that don't know? And then thirdly, what about the world and your observations about what's happening to the world around us? And then we'll go to questions from the audience. This is a on-the-record, videoed, live-streamed event. And so if Sir Richard speaks generalities at some point, that may be because there are details that are not quite appropriate yet
As opposed to me not knowing what the answer is.
to talk about here. Yes, I would say he can disguise those two items as he wishes. But if he doesn't answer a question directly, it may not be because he doesn't know the answer. You could think of other reasons. Let me start off, though, get you just to say a word about the Kennedy Trust and the Kennedy's scholars and why we should be more grateful for them than we are. How many do we have? How many are we going to have? Just for a general education, yeah?
Well, thank you, Professor Allison. Am I allowed to call you Graham?
Graham, please.
It feels very intimidating because my 23-year-old self is here in this space, and I remember being here, and I'm sitting next to my dean of the time, who was this very, very friendly, but still intimidating in my own mind. So it's such a huge privilege and a pleasure to be alongside you today. The Kennedy Scholarship, which was utterly transformative for me that year, I think, because I learned so much in this extraordinary environment as a special student for that year. For those of you who don't know, I'll give you a quick 30-second burst on the Kennedy Memorial Trust. It's a British charity, but unusually and wonderfully, its origins were in the sort of outpouring of grief and loss when JFK was assassinated, which reached all around the globe, and particularly to the UK. And so there was the government of the day, the British government of the day, decided to have a public subscription. And so it was open for members of the public to donate money, and also obviously businesses gave money as well. And out of this money raised, two things happened. One is a physical memorial at Runnymede, where the Magna Carta, of course, was signed over 800 years ago, where an acre of land has been donated by the British people to the United States. And then there was the Living Memorial, which was a set of scholarships every year. And I was lucky enough to have a recipient. We have another recipient in the front row, and Professor Mitter, the Professor of Chinese Studies here at Harvard. And I'm going to make the other scholars just put their hands up, because they are here amongst us, the current crop. Come on, stick your hands up. Here we go. Very good. These are the very best British graduate students who have won these very, very difficult to acquire scholarships, and they spend some time here.
Well, I would say fantastic. I personally am also the beneficiary of British generosity in creating the Marshall Scholars Program after the Marshall Plan, and the British government created a scholarship program like the Rhodes Scholarship Program that fortunately Harvard and other kids get a chance to compete for. I spent two wonderful formative years at Oxford, thanks to the British largesse. So you're not only nice taking Americans to be educated there, but sending Brits to be educated here. So we're grateful. I think that if President Trump says our allies never did anything for us, we have a good example to the contrary.
The Marshall Program is a great program, and of course, my friend and former colleague Bill Burns was also a Marshall.
Absolutely. Richard, take us back to here you are a student at the Kennedy School. Why would a promising young man end up a spy?
Well, good question. Because someone asked me whether I would be interested when I was at Oxford, and so it was already cooking a bit when I was here for my year. And it's a really good question, but because in those days we're a bit more open now about what we tell people as they go into the process. But we're talking now, remember, the mid-1980s. And MI6 was a very secretive organization then. And so they really didn't tell me a lot. But I got somebody at Oxford asked me whether I would be interested in an alternative field of foreign affairs. And I must have been a very naive 20-year-old, because I didn't clock what they meant until I got a letter, and then I arrived at a very impressive building just near Buckingham Palace. And they told me, and I guess I'd wanted to work.
That's called the circus in Smiley, yes?
In the Carry, absolutely, the circus, absolutely. Or if you're a Slow Horses fan, I think is River House, or whatever. They all think so. So I was interested in international affairs. I did at the Kennedy School a set of programs which are very much focused on international relations, international affairs. And I was looking at the Foreign Office, British Foreign Office in parallel. And in the end, I think it was just curiosity that got the cat. And I wanted to go and find out what this world would be like. And I didn't have any buyer's remorse, I'm glad to say.
Okay, and so if I were a student here in the college or in the Kennedy School or one of the other schools, is this, under the Ask What You Can Do, is this a good career for Kennedy School, Harvard graduates?
I think so, because of whatever nationality you are, the ability to serve your country and to help to protect its citizens from some of the threats that are out there, whether that is hostile states that might wish to do your country harm, or it's a terrorist group that would try and bring devastation to the streets of your cities, then being part of an organization that patiently, carefully tries to acquire the information, the intelligence that will help you to detect those threats and disrupt them is very rewarding. It's hard. It's not like the movies. It's not action-packed every minute, but through the slow accumulation of relationships of trust and building an ability to persuade people to share with you secrets that, of course, in their positions that they hold, they should not, is both fascinating because you're dealing with human nature in all its forms, and very rewarding if you can just make a difference and prevent something bad from happening.
Well, give us in a capsule, if you would, kind of what it is I do if I sign up. I sign up for MI6. Now I'm a spy, and I go basically in CIA world. Yeah. There's two different sort of paths. Yeah. There's operators, and they go often and actually do something. Okay, maybe explode even something. And there's analysts, and they try to figure out. And in between, there are people who, as you say, persuade someone who might know something to provide that information to us, to you. Yep. Of course, if I do that, I think in most countries I'm a traitor. So actually, there's a novel now called The Spy and the Traitor about this British MI6 agent that you had in KGB in the 70s and 80s. So one man's spy is maybe another man's traitor. Well, that all of a sudden makes it interesting in terms of what the relations are about. So give us an idea. What is I sign up, I'm going to try to do my best. What do I do? Yeah.
So I recognize the book that you've just named, but one of the things that no chief will ever say is to identify.
You wouldn't agree that he was or wasn't?
I would absolutely never identify somebody, even if, as is the case sometimes, people write their memoirs. It's an article of faith that we will never name people who are secret agents for us. Because, of course, that's part of the contract, if you like, that you go into with someone when you ask them to take the sort of risks that you're asking to. So to answer your question, the difference between MI6 and CIA, I mean, there are many, not least scale, but one of them is that we don't have the analysts. So we are a pure collection agency. And we're a human intelligence collection agency. There's a wonderful institution called GCHQ, which is the equivalent of the NSA in the US, that does signals intelligence and technical collection. But we're a human intelligence, and therefore, as you describe, we've got people in a range of roles, of course, including a large number of brilliant technologists, probably a goodly portion of the service are technologists. But the sort of people you're talking about are case officers, and yes, it's their job to build a relationship with another human being, and if you like, you are persuading them to part with secrets, which in many cases, of course, they shouldn't be doing that. And that requires a relationship of real trust to be developed with them, because by definition, they're going to be taking risks in doing that with you. And if you are in the margins of a terrorist group, then very clearly that is of high risk, physical risk for you. But it's also the case if you are an Iranian official doing this, then likewise, we know very well what would happen. So you have to create that relationship of trust, and then you need to look after the people. You need to make sure that you're not caught, frankly. And MI6 has a very proud record of making sure that when we enter into these relationships with people, that we do look after them and they can feel confident that what they provide us with will make a real difference. Because often these people, they're very brave men and women by definition, and they are often they do it for a variety of reasons, but they're often doing it because they are very deeply disaffected with the regime that they represent, and this is their way of doing something about it.
Well, and just on that one, you and Bill Burns were both very active, and Bill has described this in considerable public detail about recruiting in Russia after the invasion of Ukraine, because quite a lot of Russians thought this was a dumb decision and became to be more and more disaffected with the regime, including people in very influential positions. So again, without disclosing any secrets, do you agree with Bill that this was a very rich recruitment environment, and maybe say anything about it?
I always agree with Bill Burns, because he's a man of great wisdom. Look, I've also spoken publicly about this, not least to invite disaffected Russians to be in contact, including through a dark web portal that we developed, and the agency has something similar. Because you're right, many Russians, including many Russians working for the regime in Russia, were utterly dismayed by what Putin did in February 2022. And so, yes, those times become productive times for us. The crushing of, in an earlier age, the crushing of the Prague Spring in 1968 was a time when many Russians despaired of what was being done in their name, or Soviets in those days, and came and worked for Western services. So,
tell us a little bit more about what MI6 actually does. So you have your spies, or your case officers. They establish relations and do human intelligence. But then ultimately the prime minister or the foreign minister is trying to make some choices about what to do in X or Y. And so you, through the process, produce what we would call the equivalent of a intelligence analysis, some of which in our system is done by CIA, some of which is then done by the National Intelligence group with a. So what's the analysis or the collection then is informed by your perspective and analysis about what this tells us about whether Iran is likely to do X or Y if we do this, or whether Turkey will do this or that, or whether this or that's happening in China, because the policymaker is not interested so much in the process as in the, product that informs his views. So give us a little more texture to how that works in the British system.
So you've found that person who is prepared to share those secrets with you. It's, by definition, you are trying to, first of all, the starting point here is you don't decide what you're going to collect. You have a discussion with people in government about what they need. What are the gaps? There is no point in an expensive intelligence agency collecting a pile of material which a journalist might be able to collect or a good diplomat would collect. That's not our job. So you have to sort of set the threshold of what is genuinely secret, what needs to be acquired, genuinely secret, and makes a difference. You know, you can collect a lot of secrets that really are irrelevant to the United Kingdom. So they've got to, then you go after them, you succeed in collecting them, and this is a very inexact science. So sometimes people talk about intelligence coverage. I don't like that term because by definition, if you manage to find a human being over here who's prepared to help you in one part of government, you get a shaft of light on that subject. It is opened up to you and you understand it. And then you may have in another part of the forest, you may have somebody else who is prepared to work for you, and you'll get another shaft of light with a sort of penumbra of insight around it. And then you have darkness in between. And the trick is, how do you put those sources of information together and try and work out what might be in the dark spaces in between? And that's where the assessment community comes in. And that's very difficult and very inexact. But ultimately, you're trying to find information which gives the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and indeed through also our allies, because we share key intelligence, particularly with the US and other close allies, decision advantage. It's not often actually the big strategic thing. I always say if you want to understand, I don't know whether you agree with this, Graham, but if you want to understand what a dictator's strategic intent is, read what they say. Because Xi Jinping or Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin have set down in some detail their view of where they would like to go strategically. We don't. Putin has told us everything we need to know about why he's interested in dominating Ukraine. Where we come in is, where is he at the moment? What's he thinking about the next stage? What's he thinking about negotiations? What's he thinking about the battlefield situation? What are the generals telling him? How accurate is that? All of those things you're looking to try and manage the situation in Ukraine, to give you one example.
Okay, so
and in the UK system, unlike the US, where you have, if you like, competing centres of assessment and analysis, and it comes into the White House, and the White House then has to work out which of the CIA or DIA or State Department, which version they think is probably the most accurate. In the UK system, we have a joint intelligence committee, and all source stuff, including open source, comes into the JIC, and then a single version of the truth is not. Now, if you get it right, that's wonderful, but of course the danger is that you get groupthink. And people would argue that perhaps in the run-up to the Iraq War, that's what we slipped into.
In both the US and that. Yeah. But so we have 5 different collection streams, and you're doing the HUMINT at MI6, and I'm doing listening to everything at GCHQ, the equivalent of NSA. So they listen to everything that they can collect, and I have somebody else doing geospatial, and he's taking pictures of everything he can take pictures of, and so now we come together and we create an intelligence assessment. You at MI6, are there still the top of that totem pole, or are there 3 equals for the presentation? So we're trying to figure out what Putin is going to do. And I say, here's the conversation between Putin and his wife, okay? Or Putin and his mistress, or Putin and his assistant, and you say, one of those guys works for me, okay? And or you don't say who it is. You say, I have a very good source whom he talks to, and I have a pretty good idea what that guy says he's thinking. And then somebody else So you guys didn't come to a common assessment, or?
No, not in that sense. So, I mean, first of all, to be clear, it's not what you meant, but GCHQ doesn't just collect everything. It collects what it's legally warranted to be allowed to, for the record.
And NSA never collected anything that was illegal.
I'm not commenting on the NSA, but I know where my British colleagues are on that. So we will collect the information, we'll process it, particularly in the human world, given the history in Iraq and all the rest of it. You are trying very hard to make sure that what you're being told is validated. You know, it's true. Occasionally you will find people, obviously, who will be trying to present information to you as intelligence, which actually is not valid. So there's a whole piece, and we learnt some very hard lessons around the Iraq war on that. But once you've validated it and you're confident, and you put an assessment around it of your confidence in the material, whether you can be very highly confident in it or whether it's a new source under development, that all gets put in front of the people who are the policymakers. But it's put in front of the policymakers, and it's put into the assessment machinery. We in GCHQ would not sort of agree that between ourselves. We'll be independently feeding it in.
Okay. So again, if I'm a student here and now we've pricked my imagination and I want to learn a little bit about MI6 and its activity and what it does, so I can read Le Carré's novels about Smiley. I mean, I did that, but that's a generation ago. There's this more recent book on the spy and the traitor, for example. But what would be a couple of things? Are there books or movies, or how can I get a more feel for this that's more or less accurate? I mean, a lot of it is obviously baloney, but that would be more or less accurate. Because Smiley and Le Carré capture the moral ambiguity of all this activity, that clearly it's for a good cause, but it's doing things that if you were otherwise doing would be suspect. And so where can I get a sense of both the excitement but also the complexity?
So Le Carré is clearly extraordinary literature. It's fantastic. And John Le Carré, David Cornwell in his real name, spent a short period in MI6. But a very short...
Not a very successful one, I guess, yes.
Well, certainly a more successful author.
He's a successful author, not agent.
He was brilliantly successful as an author, but he portrays these extraordinarily morally compromised, tortured characters, and that is not kind of where it is. I mean, people who join MI6 are people who are very driven by wanting to make a difference. They are very ethically aware of what they're doing, and it's really important they are. When we're selecting people to come in, we take a great deal of care to look at the type of young people who would want to join. And if you've got a massive, towering ego, you shouldn't bother really applying, because egos and strong egos make you very manipulable. So don't want them, thank you. The people have got to be very self-aware, because you are going to ask them to operate in situations where they're going to have very challenging ethical issues to consider. They've got to be very grounded. They've got to be prepared to think that through. So we spend a lot of time doing that. We have an ethics counsellor in the service, and that's not some kind of thing because people are sort of terrible. They need to go and I don't know. They need therapy. It's because that person can work things through with them and things. So I mean, that would be my first observation. It's much. People really want to be on the right side of some of this stuff, and they agonize and they work it through very, very carefully. But if you were to ask me in terms of things, I mean, most of it is so unreliable. Bond is extraordinarily unreliable, those of you who are there. I mean, I love 007, but it's an ambivalent thing, because I'm not sure if you're a young woman thinking about joining, you really want a role model which is sexist, violent, loner, insubordinate. Well, I hope young men also wouldn't want that role model. But there is a reason why we struggle a bit to hit 50-50 on gender. And my very unscientific view is that James Bond has something to do with this. And I'm rather hoping that my brilliant successor, the first woman to lead the service, Blaise Metrovelli, will be a very powerful recruiting sergeant.
So maybe this is a space for you to write something.
Yeah. To what?
To write something.
To write something.
There need to be some. I mean, again, I can't know what it is if I don't sign up and 5 years later. So in the meantime, I need some clues to what it could be and what it could be like and successfully. So in the Kennedy School now, we have actually a intelligence fellows program, which we're very proud of.
Yep.
And we have here, I think, 17 or 18 serving intelligence officers. Mark Pascal, who's here in the front row, is the director of the program. And we have discussions of what are intelligence officers and what do they do.
Yeah.
And Michael Miner and a company teach a study group if somebody wants to know a little bit of what is intelligence and what does it do. But if I'm a freshman at the college, I want to read enough to see whether I might be interested in this, and I want to read something that's more or less realistic, not just the things not to read. So is there anything out there that's close?
Well, I'm hesitating a bit, Graham, because if I name some very good books around which are non-fiction, then I risk giving them the sense that they may actually be true. But so I'm slightly caught on this one. There isn't a lot. I tell you that
I've been trying to get Richard to write something, so that's part of this plot.
No. If you're interested, you clearly have got a fantastic program to go and plug into at the K School. But also, if you decide to take forward an application, you will be given, in the privacy and not in full on-the-record glory, some more information on what these careers might involve. If you want a good, my favorite TV show, which is highly concentrated, the action happens too fast, but in some ways the scenarios are very good, is actually a French program, and it's called The Bureau. It's about the French service to DGSE. And I think there are some scenarios in there which I recognize from various points in my career. I'll leave it at that.
Good. Let me ask you a couple on the world, and then we're going to have turning in about 5 minutes to questions from the audience, where we have microphones on both this floor and on the loge. So Iran, the Armada is approaching, as President Trump has told us, and some choices are going to be made in the next several days, presumably. MI6 is supposed to know the answer to everything, so the boss asks, what's going to happen and what are the likely consequences? What do you say?
Thank you for setting me up with a very easy... well, I'm not sure I would use the term armada. Has a certain resonance in British history. But, I mean, it's very difficult to know how things are going to develop over the next period, because you have in Iran a regime which has lost all legitimacy. It's hard to overstate just how lacking now this revolutionary regime came to power in 1979, has just so little support. And it has what in the British system might be called a payroll vote. People who are in working, particularly in the security services, will, because it's in their interest, will hang on in there. And of course, we've seen their preparedness to kill thousands of unarmed protesters over the last few weeks. And it has been, we may never find out how many people were slaughtered on the streets. And these were people just going out to exercise the sort of rights that we in the UK and in the United States would hold very, very dear indeed. So there is no legitimacy. It's hanging on. It has a willingness to use violence against its own population, which keeps it in power. But eventually, it will fall because it has nothing to offer its own people. We will see over the next few weeks what's happened. The regime has an obvious opportunity to pivot to diplomacy. And if they were prepared to be very, very clear about their willingness never to go for a nuclear weapon and to do what is required in a negotiation around enrichment levels and do something on their missile program, then there might be a deal available for them. But I don't see any sign of them engaging seriously in that. Regime change is a notoriously difficult issue, and I've already referred a couple of times to Iraq. It's very difficult to know once you start off on something like that where it ends up, and intelligence is not very helpful in that. I mean, in intelligence work, you steal secrets, and sometimes I used to say to people, sometimes they ask, we steal secrets, we don't solve mysteries. And this one has, I'm afraid, an unavoidable element of uncertainty and mystery about what would develop over the coming weeks. So, I hope that we can avoid a wider conflagration in the Gulf, but we will see what happens. And I hope that those more sensible voices in the regime realize this is the time to reach out and negotiate. And I think the administration here and the Europeans are ready to listen if they've got a real compromise to make.
I think your analytic point about the difference between secrets and mysteries is a huge point. So their future is often genuinely uncertain. And the idea, therefore, that you're not a fortune teller and you don't have a crystal ball about the future is not a criticism of intelligence. It's a kind of fact of life about the reality of the situation.
Morale.
Too frequently, the consumers expect the producers of intelligence to be forecasters of a future that nobody knows. Yes.
Particularly where the situation will turn on the morale of the people in the regime and whether that starts to fracture. That's extraordinarily difficult to judge in advance. You can get some indicators that it might be about to happen, but it's very difficult to call. Because when it starts to happen, it goes fast. I mean, look at Afghanistan. When President Ghani fled the country in a helicopter, we all recognized that the Taliban were likely to take over if Western forces were withdrawn. We all underestimated how quickly that would happen. But then again, we didn't know the president would escape in a helicopter. And contrast that with Ukraine, where in many cases we thought that the Ukrainians would struggle to hold back the Russians. We had underestimated just how bad the Russian army would prove to be in the battlefield. And of course, in Zelensky, you had a different type of leader. You had somebody who was incredibly brave and stayed and led his people to resist the Russian invaders.
That's a good example. I remember we had Gorbachev here at one stage as the former leader of the Soviet Union, for those of you who have tuned into history lately. But one of the questions was, why did the CIA not correctly estimate his overthrow? And he said, I didn't anticipate it either.
No. Good line.
Let me suggest for questions, we have two microphones here at the lodges. Please introduce yourself. A brief question ends with a question mark. Sir.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Zihua, and I'm a MPH student from Chan School of Public Health. So my question is what makes intelligent work of MI6 morally righteous? So for example, right, so it sounds like all okay, like UK sending spies or like doing intelligence work on other like foreign countries, but on the other side, it sounds like all wrong if like China or other country like doing like spying work in UK. So why it looks like that way?
So it's a great question, thank you. One of the things that I would discourage British ministers from doing was to be too moralistic about the fact of spying. There is a difference between, because it's been around a long time, and most nation states do intelligence collection. So I'm less, in that space. If you go and assassinate dissidents in the United Kingdom, or you attempt to intimidate the diaspora, whether it's Tibetan or Falun Gong or Hong Konger, that's unacceptable because you're doing stuff in my country which is against my laws. So, I'm less worried about that. I made a point earlier on about the people within my organization. I mean, nothing we do is outside of British law. That's a very, very clear guideline for us. We will only do stuff which is legal within British law, and international law is a very important part of British law. So we will respect those things. That's very important. That's not true for an awful lot of other intelligence services, and I think that would mark us out. We are as subject to British law as any other citizen in the United Kingdom. That's not always the case in every other country that I'm aware of.
Including some countries that we know very well. Please.
Good evening. Thank you so much for taking the time. My name is Michael. I'm a German MPA student here. Right. And I wanted to ask you, both actually, Graham, you as well, how you see the future of the intelligence community worldwide now that Five Eyes, for example, seems to lose some support across Western nations and from the US side, as I see it. And other countries like my own, which in the past clearly restricted their intelligence agencies, now seem necessary to give them capabilities that they previously hoped to avoid.
Well, it's a great way of putting it at the end there, hope to avoid. Sometimes you have really difficult choices, don't you? And in a world which is as dangerous and contested as the one we have now, then I'm afraid there is a need for intelligence. There is a need to make sure that you can use intelligence to protect your citizens. And if you don't have, or you have a system where, for very obvious and good historical reasons, where in the post-Second World War environment, there's strong suspicion of organizations such as domestic security services. You find the same suspicion in countries that were formerly behind the Iron Curtain. It's a very natural thing. But this is, democratic societies have to try and find the right balance between protecting their citizens, ensuring that bombs don't go off, or that, in the Russians' case at the moment, they don't carry out arson attacks or assassinations on our territory, and civil liberties. And that was why I was rather labouring the point about staying within the law. It really is fundamental to having, if you like, the license to operate in the 21st century, that you can demonstrate that. Because if you don't, you will get eviscerated when the first scandal hits, if you're not obeying that rule. So I think that's where I am on it. I think the need for it is ever present. And by the way, it's also a team sport. If you're going to do counter-terrorist work, you are going to have to cooperate effectively with services from other countries. Sometimes, UK and Germany, it's very comfortable. You're dealing with people who have a very similar value set, and you have the same guardrails. Sometimes you're dealing with people where that is not the case, and the values are very different, and their methodologies are very different, and they would do stuff that you would not do yourself, and you have to manage that in a way that does not expose you to either ethical or legal jeopardy. And that is not straightforward. It's very difficult.
I would simply say I agree. I think the complexity from especially from a German point of view now, is having essentially subcontracted German security to U.S. leadership over the period since World War II, as that's becoming, or as question marks are arising about it. You have Germans now asking questions that they hadn't been asking before, and I would say that's, welcome to the grave new world. Yeah. So please, sir.
Thank you both for the enlightening conversation. I think still as fascinating, almost as fascinating as James Bond. Well, I am Manuel Jose. I study economics and government in the college, and I'm from Colombia. So I see Great Britain with MI6, the US with CIA, and my country, we have terrorist organizations, cartels, you name it, we have that. And I'm guessing my question would be how to deal with intelligence in a smaller country, how to craft intelligence of our own while still relying on larger agencies and be able to identify threats and eliminate them.
It's another great question, thank you. And your country, Colombia, is a very good example of one which still faces clearly some very significant, but a few years, 20, 30 years ago, faced a massive problem of drugs cartels which out-muscled the state and outgunned the state. And in those sort of places, and Colombia would be a good example, it's, I think, incumbent on organizations like CIA and MI6 to try and support the local services to be able to allow the government to exert the necessary control over your own country. And that's tough. When you've got a lot of drugs money floating around, you've got issues of corruption, all of those, and it's long and patient work. But Colombia, I think, for all of the challenges it still has, is a success story of a country that has really tried to overcome that heritage. Still work to be done, clearly.
Thank you.
That's a tough job. Please.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. My name is Kat. I'm a 3L at the law school. My question is, how deep has the damage of the Trump administration gotten into the CIA and the relationship with other global agencies? And is there ever hope one day, knock on wood, for reconciliation and rebuilding that friendship?
Look, don't catastrophize here. The relationship between the US and UK is a close one. It has always survived the ups and downs of different policy disputes over the years, and the intelligence relationship is usually pretty insulated from the broader things. And we work really hard to make sure that is the case, because this relationship between, let's take the US and the UK and the intelligence world, it's not a sentimental relationship. I mean, it helps if you've got similar values and if you like the people you're dealing with, but you're doing it because you're doing it in the national interest of your own country. And the partnership is one designed to help the national interests of both countries. And that remains the case. And I work very hard with my relationship with John Ratcliffe, the current director of CIA, as I work very, very closely with Bill Burns, his predecessor. So there are a lot of people who treasure this relationship, working very hard to make sure that it survives in good shape.
Thank you. That's good news.
And Richard, say just another word about that, because there were several reports in the newspaper, not necessarily to be believed, but they got a lot of play about some people in the British intelligence system saying they would withhold some information given their worry about President Trump or about Ratcliffe. So that was a news story that ran for a week in the New York Times and other places, which I think is what she's referring to.
Yeah, I don't recognize it, Graham, is the honest answer, because as I say, that relationship and keeping that relationship is so important. It sometimes betrays a sort of misunderstanding of the way in which intelligence is shared. When intelligence is shared, even and published, if you like, even into your own governmental system, as you know well, as somebody who was a consumer of it, it doesn't say on the outside label, the agent who's produced this is named thing, and they live inside. It doesn't say that. It disguises it, because an intelligence report in the US system, I mean, it goes to a lot of people.
Right.
And so it's important that it's not possible to determine from the intelligence who is behind it. And the same is true with signals intelligence. It's carefully disguised. And so when you share across international boundaries, that is the case, and maybe a little bit of extra protection is put around it. So it really is a bit of a non-issue, I think, this one. I don't recognize it. I mean, occasionally, if you find yourself in a different legal position, even between friends, so to speak, then there will be occasions where you can't legally or share, and that works in both directions, and people manage it, and people usually understand the other side's compliance and legal framework, so they don't tend to put you in an awkward spot on this. So it's not new, is what I'm saying, and people manage it.
Historically, I think having watched it, I think the U.S. UK relationship is so deep and thick. I mean, it really is a special relationship in which it's very hard to see any barriers. But then there's the Five Eyes, which not everything that's shared with the British is shared with the others. And then beyond the Five Eyes, there's many intelligence things that say no foreign. That means not for other countries. So there are distinctions. And I think in the US-UK case, just as you said, this is kind of so thick that it's pretty hard to get disentangled. And at the professional working level, it's running there all the time. So the political noise can be, a layer or two above, and not. And I think similarly, in the same time, I was at Davos, where President Trump had announced when he's coming that the U.S. may invade Greenland. And the NATO commander and his counterparts were off meeting in another country, doing their planning as if they were on a different planet. There was no plans. This was a nobody's threat assessment. This was no plans. There were no operations. They were worried about what Putin might do after Ukraine. So again, layers and layers, and I think fortunately for the professionals that have come to work with each other for a long period of time and who actually are dependent on each other, that relationship, for as far as I've seen over the whole period, has stayed very, very thick. So you and Bill Burns would have conversations that you probably couldn't have even with some of your counterparts.
Yeah, and same with John Radcliffe. It's a very important relationship, and it's,
And you worked with him before when he was, so you know him.
Yeah.
Please.
Thank you so much for the talk. I'm Jinju. I'm a student at the college. I was hoping you could speak a little to how intelligence agencies choose to allocate focus.
Yeah.
So I would assume, obviously, after Russia invades Ukraine, a lot of it has to refocus on Europe. And sort of what's the balance here between there's some elected official that wants this thing, let's refocus, versus some internal priority setting that goes a couple years in the future? Or how does this kind of process go about?
That is such a great question, because you have put your finger on one of the really most difficult things that, as the chief, you have to try and manage, because there's always vastly more demand for intelligence than you can ever supply. And you have to strike a balance between keeping focused on the really, really important subjects, because this is not easy. To persuade somebody to come and spy for you is a big thing, and it takes a time, and then once you get them working with you, you want to look after them and you want to make them a long-term asset. So for all those things, you can't switch and turn. You can't suddenly decide we're going to do something next week that it's not as, you've got to be patient and you've got to stay on target in order to be. So you've got to do that. At the same time, there's no conceivable world when a crisis blows up in country X, which doesn't happen neatly to have been at the top of your priorities, that the answer to the British Prime Minister when he asked the Chief of MI6 for intelligence on that is to say, look, PM, I think we'd agreed, we weren't doing that. So, if you're all right, I'll give that a pass and you crack on. That's not going to have, he or she is going to want to have answers. So you've got to combine staying on persistent long-term targets and an agility and an ability to turn on a dime and move in and generate what you can on a given thing. And it's that sort of long-term piece and the agility that if you can pull it off is the sweet spot. But I can describe it much more easily than I can execute on it. But that's what you try and do. And it's fairly obvious that certain states have been an issue for some time. There are rogue states like Iran and Putin's Russia. You have to be persistent with those. I've said publicly that my old service put more effort into understanding China than any other. Why is that? Because China is not in the same category. I wouldn't describe China in any way as a rogue state, but it is a massively important state, and it's probably the state that is going to impact on the United Kingdom over the next 50 to 100 years more than any other. And it's not straightforward to understand. It's run by the Chinese Communist Party. It's quite a secretive operation that they run, and therefore understanding it is a key priority to navigate both potential threats but also potential opportunities in terms of cooperating with China where it's possible to cooperate.
Please.
Yeah, thank you so much. This talk's been great. My name's Amelia Vanderlaan. I'm a mid-career student at the Kennedy School, former Foreign Service officer as well. I guess my question would be, we've seen a real backslide in terms of public attitudes towards public service writ large. We've lost 300,000 people out of US federal service in the last year. But that's not just isolated to the US, like we're seeing it sort of globally. So how do you view kind of the future of public service and strengthening people's faith in sort of government institutions, whether it's MI6, CIA, or these broader sort of apertures that keep us all safe? Thank you.
Emilia, again, thank you. Fantastic question, and thank you for your service. This is really difficult. I mean, in the UK, around the intelligence agencies, we're really fortunate because we have very high levels of public trust and approval. But I never took that for granted. It came back to what I said about in the 21st century, you need a license to operate. And you have to earn that. And I felt that we needed to be more open in order to do that. I also felt that if we were going to reach out to communities that might not think that MI6 is a place where they would feel at home working, then we needed to do that. We needed to explain ourselves. So I was very keen to do that. There's a broader problem, though, isn't there, beyond intelligence world of governance and of people's faith and trust. I don't know if anybody, we were both in Davos, and in Davos every year, Richard Edelman launches his Trust Index, which is a global index, and it's sobering reading because trust in institutions and trust between fellow humans right across the planet, because they survey people in the West, but also in China, India, and these places, is very low. And I would argue that the sort of polarization that we're seeing being driven by the algorithms in our social media is driving that. People are becoming less willing to disagree agreeably and to hear counter arguments. Is why these types of institutions are so absolutely fundamental to the future of the human race. You have to learn to have those disputes and do it in a civilized way. And I think we're losing that a bit. And we're surrounded by populism, and populism offers very easy answers. But in my experience, is absolutely appalling in government. And they said we go through a cycle of them having to be found out. So it does worry me the way in which people in public services roles are being denigrated. On the other hand, it's up to people working in public service I think to be open to do new things, to new ways of working, and to make the case for why they are working in the public interest. But it's tough at the moment, I think.
We're coming close to the witching hour, but I'm going to take this question here at the Loge, and then this lady, and then unfortunately we have to wrap up. So please.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for coming to speak today. My name's David. I'm a student at the college. And I was just interested in knowing some of your insights or maybe something that sticks out to you about how the intelligence community has changed in your time there, and maybe potentially future challenges that you see for the community.
Great. Thanks, David. Great question. Very quickly on that. Well, look, I left here in 1986 and I joined MI6 in 1987. I learnt to type on a manual typewriter. This was such a different environment in terms of the technology that surrounded you. And that is the massive difference. The fundamentals of the job, as we've tried to convey a bit, are around creating a relationship of trust with somebody who will take risk for you. That hasn't changed, but the kind of technological envelope in which you operate, both in terms of the technology you employ, but also critically the technology that you have to manage. So you can imagine, if you are trying to keep a relationship with another human being secret, just think your way into the way in which biometrics work, the way in which ubiquitous technical surveillance, street cameras, gait recognition, iris recognition, all of that, and then try and, without me going into too much detail, try and work through the challenges. And I think that's the challenge that all agencies are trying to work through, is how do you stay ahead of that technology and use the technology to keep you in the game. So that I think it's technology that is the big difference.
Please.
Thank you so much. My name is Anne. I'm actually a freshman at the college, hoping to go into intelligence. Maybe I'll be a spy, who knows. I wanted to ask a little bit about how you reconcile your actions in helping to collect intelligence for a government who might take this intelligence and make a decision that you don't necessarily agree with or you think is destructive. Do you keep, you'll keep serving, but I guess where do you draw that line?
It's not a cracking question. So if you join the civil service, public service, or an intelligence organization, and you are doing it in a democracy, then you are, to my mind, accepting that you believe in democracy, and therefore the government which is elected to take office has the decision of the people behind it, and you serve it. And you will serve it even where you might have a difference of policy view. You will accept that they get to choose and you get to serve that government. Obviously, there are limits. One limit is you don't do anything which breaks the law. So if a government were to ask you to do that, you would decline to do that. And secondly, of course, if you really feel strongly that you disagree with the policy that a government is pursuing, then you have the opportunity to resign, and that's the ultimate thing you can do. It's the only thing you can do if you feel that strongly. But mostly over the years, I've definitely had disagreements with the government of the kind, but I've come back to the fact that I'm a Democrat, and if they were elected and they're asking me to do something which is within the law, then that's their prerogative.
Thank you.
Great.
Okay. I apologize for coming to the end of the witching hour, but it's now a little bit over 7. What a fantastic thing to have Sir Richard come back as a former student and tell us about his career in MI6. I think we're looking forward to his, I don't know whether you're going to make a movie or a television show or write it up as a book, so we have a more authentic account of what actually an MI6 person does. But I think among the careers that Kennedy School graduates have had, of which the school is proud, this intelligence officer is one, and let's say thank you very much.